Hello and welcome. My name is Riiser. Starting today I'll create a new segment here on YouTube where I will review webcomics. There are good comics, there are bad comics, and then there's horrible comics. And I want to review them all. And I want to review the comics you suggest. So, starting today, I will review a webcomic called Bizarre Uprising. So you can sort of get the idea of what this new program is going to be. So, without further ado, let's dig into Bizarre Uprising, and welcome to the Webcomic Relief. Bizarre Uprising was one of the comics that I read when I was a little kid, and which is kind of what actually got me started in making webcomics. The only problem is that looking back at it, it was actually really bad. I mean, the artwork is sort of okay, but the story is horrible, and now that I am a 20-year-old man, I can sort of see that the guy who made this is actually kind of a pig. Objectifying women and really just treating them all like whores and sex-hungry beasts. It's actually pretty sad now that I think about it. I liked this comic in the beginning. In fact, back then I liked Bizarre Uprising so much that I couldn't help but actually get inspired by it when I made my own webcomic and used some of the elements from it. Thankfully, only the bits that weren't completely retarded. Speaking about bushwhacking, let's stop beating around the bush. The Webcomic Relief has 4 sections: art, story, characters, and the final verdict. So, without further ado, let's begin with the story. Meet Mitsu, the protagonist of the story. He's an ordinary high school student, and of course he has his obligatory nerd friend called Taki. Also, they have a friend called Calyx. Yeah. Actually, the story is pretty basic to begin with. Mitsu is just this hopeless little guy who just wants to get into the trousers of some girl. And hey, who didn't want to do that when they were in high school? And that's pretty much it. That's what it actually starts out as, and it's working sort of good. It's goofy, but it's laughable. But then suddenly it takes a dark turn, and that should just have been avoided. To sum up, Mitsu is a vampire, and he gets these chest pains because he doesn't drink blood. But I am more worried because he's walking out in bright daylight. Am I the only one thinking Twilight? But don't worry, it's not as bad as Twilight. But it's still very bad. The story tries to have a lot of balls in the air, but doesn't really juggle them all that well. It tries to have the story about how Mitsu tries to get into the pants of this hot girl, this kind of bland girl who tries to get the affection of Mitsu, and then there's this whole dilemma of being a vampire. And I shit you not, he actually also gets a third girl who becomes his girlfriend. And this is kind of where things begin to take the turn of the things I hate the most about the comic. The comic is written by a guy called Raslo and UG28Go. And I really think these two are kids. Kids in the puberty. Kids who just like twist their head at every tit that comes around. Every woman in this comic needs sex. That's their only function in life. In fact, the story is so much about sex that it even makes a lesbian turn straight just cause she wants the cock. The comic actually has quite a variety of characters, and 5 of these characters are women that you establish a connection with in the beginning of the comic. There's Diana, Mitsu's mom. There's Lila, the one that Mitsu wants to get into the trousers of. Mika, who wants to get into the trousers of Mitsu. And Plum, that actually gets into the trousers of Mitsu. And then there is a character not even listed on the character page who wants Lila. Yes, Lila is the lesbian who turns straight. Now, let's get into the section I would like to call Who is not a whore? Our first contender is Plum. Mika asks Plum to help her get the affection of Mitsu. However, Plum seems to have mistaken this and actually decides to take Mitsu's affection for herself. And she isn't really subtle about this. Not subtle at all. Plum is also rather quick on the rebound. Did you notice her on the first page where we saw Calyx? Yes, she is right there. Also, after breaking up with Mitsu, she doesn't waste a second to get into the pants of this guy. What a whore. Our next contender is Mika. Mika is supposed to be the cute girl of the comic who wants Mitsu's affection and nothing else. No sex, no fuss, no muss, no... Moving right along! Our next contender is Layla. Layla has since the beginning of the comic been used as a sexual object, so she is not turning into a whore, she just is. Layla is in a relationship with this girl. However, not long passes after a little dry humping that she soon finds out, screw my relationship, I want the cock. Our last contender is Diana. Diana is Mitsu's mother. Being an elderly lady, she won't demean herself to all that sexual crap. No, even though she dresses like a whore and is very suggestive, she wouldn't demean herself to actually have sex in this comic. I mean, that is just blasphemy, isn't it? If you said yes, then you're horribly wrong. I mean, it's bizarre uprising. Nothing in this comic is sacred. She is fucking a schoolboy. God! It's actually in the art department that the comic gets its points. Things look pretty good. It got proportions right. It tries different angles. The effects are pretty good too. Fingers, feet, all looks pretty believable. There are comics out there that of course has far better art. But there's also comics out there that has far worse art. What I like about Bizarre Uprising is that it actually tries to be very good and actually succeeds in it. It tries to push the envelope. But of course you can always nitpick. Like I said earlier, the story should have stayed with the whole teenager vampire thing and give it a funny twist. But because it tries to have action in it as well, we get these rather vague scenes. The things look pretty bad. You don't really get the feeling that they are hitting each other or there's any kinds of impact. In fact, there's one point where it should be a very horrible scene, but it just looks ridiculous. A fair warning, dear viewers. What you're going to see now is probably one of the funniest things in the entire comic. And it's not intentional. I mean seriously, what is she trying to do here? Is it a slap but she's using both hands? Is she pushing him because she's waving downwards? But whatever she does, it looks like it's painful and this is just hilarious. Okay. I'm okay. It's time for the final verdict. The story of Bizarre Uprising could be good, but isn't. Had it stuck to be a funny version of Twilight with a guy vampire falling in love with a human girl, it would be great. But it insists on having combat, and I don't really like that combat. It also insists on having a dark story that doesn't work. So for story, I can only give it a 3. The characters are horrible. I don't even want to go into depths with it. A solid 1. Fuck these characters. The art, on the other hand, is really good, and I only got one suggestion for the artist. Get out while you still can. The art is a 7. So what's the final verdict? You may think I will add up all these numbers, but I won't. The final verdict is all in all my opinion to you. So the comic is a solid 2. It isn't worth reading. It's pretty much just soft-core webcomic. So that's Bizarre Uprising, and the very first episode of the Webcomic Relief. I'm here for you guys. If you got a webcomic you want me to check out, write it down here in the comment section and I'll be sure to check it out. And if it's very good or very bad, I will review it. 'Cause I'm bringing you the Webcomic Relief, and I'll see you next time.